What if overthinking wasn't a flaw, but an unfinished form of wisdom? Some minds just won't rest. Not because they're broken or because they're necessarily suffering, but because their very nature is to explore, connect, dissect, imagine. While others move through life with confident steps and quick decisions, these minds pause, question everything, even what others don't notice. They're not satisfied with knowing the what. They need to understand the why, the what for, and what's underneath it all. They do it without asking permission, without breaks, and often without comfort. They think beyond obligation, feel beyond the spoken word. And that excess, what most people call a burden or weakness, might actually be, according to Carl Jung, a sign of a mind that's oriented toward the depths of itself. Not everyone who overthinks is lost. Some are just far away, far from the noise of the immediate, far from social certainties, far from fast answers. But not because they're avoiding something, because they're searching. Jung didn't see these minds as sick. He saw them as soul travelers, people whose dominant function isn't to please, but to understand. They're not here to accept the world as it is, but to uncover the invisible pattern that holds it together. And that's no small task. In fact, it might be one of the most demanding ways to exist. Deep thinking isn't a choice. It's a way of being. People like this don't decide to reflect. They do it the way they breathe, because their awareness is wired to pick up on symbols, contradictions, essence. They ache at superficiality. They can't stand hollow conversations or the comfort of easy explanations. They see the cracks in language, feel the false coherence in things that don't add up, and know, viscerally, that reality can't be explained by facts alone. Their minds don't give them a break, but they also offer them a secret map, one that leads to the deepest layers of the self, of others, of meaning itself. Carl Jung devoted his life to observing these restless souls, not as patients, but as archetypes in motion. For him, overthinking, when it rises from within rather than from fear, is a sign of a soul seeking integration. A soul that refuses to settle for social masks or surface-level narratives. These individuals often have thinking or intuition as a dominant inner function, which doesn't mean they're physically isolated, but that their attention is naturally drawn inward, toward meaning, symbols, the hidden principles behind the apparent chaos of the world. Our current culture punishes that kind of depth. We live in a time of speed, empty statements, and instant reactions. If you hesitate, you're weak. If you ask too many questions, you're a problem. If you need time to decide, you're inefficient. In that context, the deep thinker is quickly labeled as anxious, indecisive, or avoidant. But Jung offered a different lens. What looks like paralysis might just be precision in progress. What looks like fear might actually be respect for complexity. What looks like distrust could be a refusal to betray one's own clarity. But clarity has a cost. Jung warned that these people, if they don't learn to balance their inner functions, can get lost in their own labyrinths. Thinking too much without grounding that thought in lived experience can lead to a dangerous disconnection from the body, from the present, from others. The mind, in its hunger for meaning, can turn into a tyrant, unable to stop, unable to act, unable to feel. That's why the greatness of these souls depends on their ability to integrate what doesn't come naturally to them: emotion, action, surrender. The world doesn't just need brilliant minds. It needs whole human beings. But how does someone become whole when they're torn between analysis and doubt, between judgment and the need for certainty? Jung didn't offer formulas. He offered paths, inner, personal, deeply subjective paths. The process of individuation, his central concept, was never about fixing the overthinker. It was about helping them find the center from which they can think without falling apart. And that center isn't found in external ideas or borrowed beliefs. It's found in the dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious, between the self and its shadow, between what we say we are and what actually lives inside us. The deep thinker, in Jung's view, is a soul on the edge of revelation or collapse. Because a mind that never stops can become either a lighthouse or a prison. And the difference isn't how much it thinks, but why it thinks. Is it thinking to escape pain or to transform it? To avoid the world or to understand it better? to feed the ego, or to break through it. Intention changes everything. A reflective mind can be a sanctuary or a trap. And the fate of those who can't, won't, stop thinking plays out on that thin line. This journey isn't for everyone. It takes courage to look at yourself with no filter, to question what you've always believed, to risk your own stability in the name of a deeper truth. It also takes humility to admit that thinking isn't the same as understanding, that analyzing isn't the same as integrating, that clarity doesn't always come from logic, but sometimes from what can't be named. In the end, deep thinking is a form of loving the unknown. It's a kind of reverence for the invisible, a stubborn belief that reality has more layers than we're shown. And even though it hurts at times, even though it can be exhausting, it's also a way of honoring existence with dignity. Because in a world that worships speed, taking the time to think deeply is still a radical act. And as Jung understood so well, maybe there's no freedom more real than that of the person who dares to know themselves, even if that means facing everything they don't yet understand. Deep thinking is, for many, an invisible sentence. You won't see it on their face or hear it in their voice. It drags behind their absent gaze, shows up in the pause before they speak, in the way they replay a conversation days later, looking for the hidden meaning in a word, a gesture, a silence. For people who live like this, nothing is just what it seems. Everything's a symbol, a message, a door to something deeper. Reality becomes layered, and they, like divers of the soul, sink in without air into places most people only skim with their fingertips. Sometimes they feel broken, not because they are, but because the world feels built for someone else. For those who decide fast, who believe without asking questions, who settle for simple answers. They can't. They don't know how. Their mind keeps spinning even when the body begs for rest. While others sleep, they remember. While others celebrate, they analyze. Not out of bitterness, but out of need. They need to understand. Not for control, but to find meaning. Jung understood this better than most. He never treated mental complexity as pathology, but as the natural expression of a soul wired for wholeness. He saw that these people weren't running away. They were looking for something they often couldn't name, a deeper coherence, a truth that wouldn't collapse under time. That's why what others call overthinking is, for them, simply the only honest way to exist. They can't simplify what isn't simple. They can't silence the question that burns. And even when it hurts, they can't lie to themselves. But that inner honesty comes with a cost: isolation. They often feel like they don't belong. In conversations where everything floats on the surface, they sink. Shallow jokes, autopilot replies, the constant craving for distraction, it all feels unbearable. Not because they think they're better, but because they need more. More depth, more truth, more raw reality. And that's rare. So often they retreat. They lock themselves in their own world, not out of pride, but for protection. That retreat, though, can turn into a trap. Jung saw that too. A mind that never stops reflecting can drift away from the body, from feeling, from the present. It can get stuck in its own logic, analyzing every detail until taking action feels impossible. Thought stops being a tool and becomes a weight. Clarity turns into fog. The one searching for meaning ends up paralyzed by too many options, too many variables, too many imagined outcomes. And what began as wisdom turns into suffering. That's why the challenge isn't to think less, but to think better. It's not about shutting the mind down, but teaching it to listen to other voices. The body, the heart, the gut. Jung didn't call for mutilation, but integration. The deep thinker doesn't need to stop thinking. They need to learn how to weave that thought with other functions. To feel without judgment, to act without guarantees, to trust without proof. And that's not easy. For a mind trained in analysis, letting go of control can feel like betrayal. But it's not. It's evolution. Nobody is born whole. Each of us comes into the world with a unique psychic wiring. Some functions develop easily, others remain in the dark. Introverted thinking, the hallmark of deep thinkers, tends to push emotion, sensation, spontaneity to the background. Not out of disdain, but out of unfamiliarity. So when these people try to connect with others, they often stumble. They can't find the words. They don't catch the rhythm. They seem distant or cold when really they're overwhelmed. What they feel isn't less intense. It just has nowhere to go. And yet, when they do manage to express it, what they say can shift everything. Because they don't speak from ego or the need to impress. They speak from a deeper place, where words still carry weight, and silence isn't empty, it's a prelude. Their thinking, when aligned with the soul, becomes alchemy. They take the chaos and give it order. They take pain and give it meaning. They take the unseen and give it a name. They are craftsmen of meaning. But to get there, they have to walk through their own private hell. That hell isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, ordinary, silent. It shows up in the way they constantly question themselves, in how hard it is to trust, in the sense that they're never quite ready. They're their own harshest critics, their toughest judges. What others applaud, they dissect. What others ignore, they feel as a wound. They can't lie to themselves, and that, while noble, can also be brutal. Because there aren't always answers. And searching without finding can wear the soul down. Jung never offered guarantees. What he gave was a path, the process of individuation. An inner journey where every part of the self, including the shadow, must be faced, named, and brought into the whole. For deep thinkers, this means accepting that the mind is not everything. That some things can't be solved with logic, they have to be lived. That certain truths don't need to be understood, they need to be felt. And that no matter how much they analyze, there will always be a mystery greater than them. And that's okay, because that mystery isn't the enemy, it's the guide. When they finally embrace that paradox, being profoundly rational while also deeply human, something in them shifts. They stop resisting. They stop chasing total control. They start to trust that life, even without all the answers, still holds value. They start to act even when it's messy. They start to feel even when it hurts. And at that point, thinking is no longer a shield. It becomes a bridge. It's not a hideout anymore. It's a connection. It doesn't separate, it links. Because in the end, real deep thought doesn't lock itself away. It opens to the world while staying loyal to its truth. It doesn't get stuck in the idea, it moves beyond it. It doesn't try to explain everything, it dares to live what can't be explained. And even if that path is lonely, even if it's often misunderstood, it remains one of the most courageous ways to live. Overthinking isn't a curse. It's a gift that needs tuning, balancing, and a purpose bigger than fear. And that purpose, whether you call it meaning, authenticity, or soul, only reveals itself when you stop running from who you are. Not to surrender, but to transform. Not to fit in, but to live with integrity. In a world addicted to speed, deep thinking is an act of quiet rebellion. But it's not enough to resist. You have to learn to love, to move, to let go. And somewhere in that impossible balance, you find the peace you've been searching for all along. Maybe the deepest pain of those who overthink isn't in what they discover, but in what they sense and can't put into words. Not because they lack language, but because words always fall short when you try to translate the abyss. They know things they never learned. They feel truths they could never prove. They notice cracks in what seems solid to everyone else. And while that gives them a rare kind of vision, it also makes them strangers in their own time. A time where thinking is suspicious and doubt, almost a sin. But they're not fragile. Not in the way the world assumes. They might come off as uncertain, but inside, they're filled with a quiet strength. A strength that doesn't yell, doesn't dominate, doesn't need to win, just to understand. They live with a kind of intensity that sometimes overwhelms them, but it's also what connects them to what matters most. Without even knowing it, they're guardians of what's invisible. Of the things you can't see, but that hold everything up. Of the things you can't touch, but that change everything. They don't need everyone to get them. What they need, more than anything, is not to betray themselves. And that's not easy. We live surrounded by noise, pressure, and cheap promises of instant happiness. Everything pushes us to simplify, to pick the easy route, to move on without looking back. But they can't close their eyes. They can't pretend they didn't notice. They can't silence what lives inside them. Because once your awareness expands, There's no way to shrink it back down. The awakening that comes with deep thought has no off switch. And even if they sometimes wish for another kind of life, lighter, simpler, more normal, they know that wouldn't be their truth. Jung didn't ask them to reject their nature. He asked them to make peace with it, to understand that inner conflict isn't a mistake, it's evolution. That contradictions aren't problems to solve, but pieces to hold together. That the goal isn't to be perfect, but to be whole. Because no one escapes their shadow. And the deep thinker, no matter how sharp their mind, also has dark corners, unhealed wounds, parts of themselves they're afraid to face. And it's exactly in going toward what they avoid that real transformation begins. It's not about solving everything. No one can. It's about learning to live with open questions, with honest uncertainty, with the realization that life is a process, not a problem to fix. And that takes courage. Courage to stop when everyone else is racing forward. Courage to feel when everything around you screams for you to numb out. Courage to hold a question without turning it into an excuse. Courage to keep thinking, even when it hurts. Because sometimes, thinking is also a way of loving. Loving the complexity of the world, the depth of the soul, the truth that hasn't been spoken yet. The path of the overthinker is a lonely one, sure. But not because it's empty, because it's full of voices inside that demand attention. And those voices, at first just noise, eventually become a melody. One that not everyone will hear, but that can echo in others who are also searching for more than just survival. There might not be many of them, but they're out there. Others who also feel too much, who also wake up at 3 a.m. with questions stabbing at their chest. Others who move slow, but move with purpose. When those souls meet, something powerful happens. They don't need to say much. They recognize each other in the silences. They understand each other in the pause. They stand beside each other without making a sound. Because they know real connection doesn't happen on the surface. It happens in the unseen spaces they both carry. And even if the world doesn't notice them, even if they never trend, never go viral, their presence hits deep. They're the ones who listen when no one else does. Who hold steady when everything falls apart. Who remind us there's another way to be alive. That way isn't easy. It doesn't promise certainty, or rewards, or applause. But it offers something deeper, integrity. The chance to live without betraying your own awareness. To walk through life with your eyes wide open, even when it hurts. To choose depth, even when it overwhelms. And in that choice, there's a kind of freedom you can't buy, can't fake, can't borrow. It's the freedom of being fully, painfully, beautifully yourself. So overthinking stops being a flaw when it becomes a bridge to what's real. It stops being a weight when it becomes a compass. And it stops being torment when it's embraced as part of the path. There's no deeper redemption than accepting who we are without edits, without masks, without apologies. That's the quiet revolution of the deep thinker. Not changing the world from the outside in, but from the inside out. From the only place where change is honest, lasting, and alive. Because clarity doesn't always bring comfort, but it always brings truth. And truth, even when it stings, even when it isolates, even when it cracks you open, sets you free. It frees you from fake stories, from expectations you never chose, from roles that never fit. It frees you from the noise, from the fear, from the constant need to fit in. And once you've tasted that kind of freedom, there's no going back. You can't pretend you don't know. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to sleep. Jung knew this. Deep thinking is just the beginning. What comes after is even harder. Integration. Action. Embodiment. Making that depth more than a mental space. Making it a way of being. Loving from that place. Creating from that place. Holding contradiction without folding. Being true even when no one else understands. That's the real challenge. And also the real beauty. Not everyone is built for this. But those who are, they know. They've felt it their whole lives even before they had the words for it. They've carried it quietly, hidden it when needed, worn it like a burden. But they've also loved it secretly because deep down, they knew it was their gift. The truth. Their difference. And now they see it for what it is.